This is Dennis Webster. I'm here today to conduct an interview with Cindy Peterson. Cindy lives in the nearby community of Lakewood and is a mom, attorney, and a corporate executive, along with many other roles. Cindy, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate being asked.
Cindy Peterson is also the wife of Greg Peterson, one of the founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center. If you're interested in his life and work, there's a companion series of interviews conducted a few years ago that's available for you to view. As we get underway today, I would like to thank Kristen McMahon, president of the Jackson Center, for allowing us to conduct this interview here, and Ed Tomasini, videographer, producer, friend, for recording this event.
Here,
We are speaking on October
Yes.
31st, 2024. Cindy, in order to build a context for all that you have done, could you start by giving us a thumbnail biography?
Sure, thank you. I was born in Rochester, Pennsylvania. My parents were both from the Pittsburgh suburbs. My dad was from Donora, my mom from Rochester, Pennsylvania, and lived there till about kindergarten. Then we moved to New Jersey. And when we got to New Jersey, it was on the cusp of could I move the birth date. Let's start again. I needed to blow that. Let's start. Thank you.
Take your time. Dennis, you want to ask the question again?
Sure.
Just the end.
Okay.
I'll just,
How much should I go on? I mean, I could just burble at the mouth.
sure, you can, just enough so that we can move on from there.
Yeah, perfect.
I think
Okay.
that's probably appropriate.
Thank you. Sorry, Ed.
We are speaking on October 31st, 2024. Cindy, in order to build a context for all that you have done, could you start by giving us a thumbnail biography?
Sure, thank you. I was born in Rochester, Pennsylvania. Both of my parents' families were from the Pittsburgh suburbs. And then we moved to Westfield, New Jersey when I was in about kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the kindergarten registration, I could be moved ahead to first grade or stay in kindergarten where I was. We moved halfway through the year. And my mother wisely decided to keep me in kindergarten because I had missed half of kindergarten and half of first grade. So, but I think that was a smart move, and I think that helped me enormously because it gave me, I was a little more confident being one of the oldest kids in the class. So I went through high school in Westfield, New Jersey. It was a pretty upwardly mobile kind of community. Everybody there went to college, so it was one of those things. Even though my mother had not gone to college, my dad had gone to the Merchant Marine Academy. It was easy for me to be, just pulled up and assimilated in with everybody who thought and felt that way. While I was there, I met a girl when I was in second grade named Kathy. And she was smarter than me, and she was beautiful, and she wanted to be an author when she grew up. And that was something that I didn't even know what an author was. So I quickly attached myself to her, and I found that I enjoyed the company of people who were smarter than me and knew things that I didn't know. She could recite the presidents in sequence. I mean, wow. For a second grader, that was so impressive. And we've been friends, dear friends for life. I was a Girl Scout. I loved Girl Scouting because it taught self-initiative. I chased all the badges, and it was just a great experience for anybody to to encourage you to be a self-starter. So I was a big fan of Girl Scouting. We didn't have any family in this community, so all my relatives were still in the Pittsburgh area. So we became a pretty tight unit. I have two younger brothers, so we were all pretty close. But it was just that kind of community where everybody went to school, everybody got good grades, everybody, I kept my nose to the grindstone. I was a pretty good student. And then I went on to Allegheny College, and the reason why I chose Allegheny was because my family, being from the Pittsburgh area, had a summer home in Conneaut Lake, Pennsylvania. And I went thinking, from Westfield, New Jersey, my peers were all going to Princeton, Yale, Harvard, at Georgetown. But I was happy. Allegheny was close to my summer home, being in Meadville, and I went there thinking I would be able to use the summer home and go out in the boat, and I did none of that because that distance was, I just got so involved in college life, which is where I met the love of my life, Greg Peterson.
At Allegheny.
At Allegheny. He was a senior, I was a freshman, and I didn't go there looking for, that wasn't my mission to find a husband, but he was smarter than me. I like that. He had a game plan. He was a senior, I was a freshman. He was the star of the college football team. He was the football captain. And he was fun and funny. I loved anybody with a sense of humor. And Greg not only would dance, but he could dance. So my criteria was pretty shallow. And I definitely wanted to marry somebody that could dance because I enjoyed dancing. So he fit the bill, and I kind of decided, okay, you're the one. So we dated his senior year, my freshman year, then he went on to law school. I ended up accelerating through college. I finished in 3 years instead of 4, only because my family was moving in New Jersey from one house to another. And I thought, if I get a job and I enroll in summer school, my mother won't drag me back home to help her move. So I ended up unwittingly getting enough credits ahead over a couple of summers that I could graduate in 3 years. So that was sort of interesting. And there was one of the women on my freshman hall was the daughter of a lawyer, and she was doing abstracts of title searches in Meadville. And one summer, she knew I was looking for a way to ground myself, that I didn't even want to stay. Well, I would live at Conneaut Lake and commute in to Meadville for classes and to work. And she said, I've been doing abstracts of title during the school year, that's my job, and I can't do it this summer. If I teach you how to do it, will you take over? And I did. She taught me all the details of how to take the title of a piece of property, and we ran it back for 100 years. So it appealed to my sense of curiosity, my sense of history, and you have to cross your I's and dot your T's, so to speak. Cross your T's and dot your I's. So I started doing that, and then she left, and she enabled me, or helped me, to set up a little business. I was very entrepreneurial while I was in college, and I was like a freelance independent contractor for the law firms in Meadville doing their title work. So that was a fun experience at Allegheny. Another great experience at Allegheny was I was able to do an independent study on vertebrate paleontology. And I went out, and somebody had discovered the bones of a woolly mammoth mastodon in Conneaut, on the shores of Conneaut Lake. And myself and another student, would go out there and help with the dig. And that was just it was so out of the box, different. So that was another great experience. And one more Allegheny story is there was a professor there. And because I'd been doing these abstracts of title, and because my father was in business and I knew how much he revered his personal attorney, who had been very kind and encouraging to me along the way, I was thinking about maybe going to law school. But at that time, there weren't that many women who did it, and I thought it'd be too hard for me, and the competition would be too tough, and I just didn't know if I had it. And I had taken an aptitude test one time, and they said, I had wondered about law school, and they said, nah, you're too social. I don't think that would be for you. So I was doubting myself. So I went to see Professor Sedig, who was just a brilliant teacher. He was head of the political science department. I'd started out as a Spanish major and then transferred into political science. So I went over to the building one evening, and it was dark in the building, and the only light on was his in his office. He was grading papers, and I kind of stood in the doorway. And I said, he said, hey, Cindy, what are you doing? He was my advisor too. I said, well, I don't know, I wanted to talk to somebody, I don't know, maybe you can tell me who to talk to. He said, well, what's on your mind? I said, well, I'm thinking of maybe going to law school. And he didn't even lift up his head from his papers. He said, of course you should. Why wouldn't you go? And that moment, those two sentences of confidence in me made all the difference. I still get choked up talking about that. So it was a pivot point in life, and I decided, okay, if he thinks I can do this, I can probably do this. So I applied and went to, I graduated early, a year ahead of my class, and I think that go-getter, the law school sort of was like, what's she doing 3 years? So I went to Dickinson Law School in Harrisburg. That was a big thing too. Greg was at Dickinson. I didn't necessarily want to be following him. This is the era of I am woman, hear me roar. But anyhow, long story, I ended up at Dickinson. And I went from being the oldest in my classes to being among the youngest. The gentleman who sat to my right in real property law had already retired from a career in the Army. He had been a sergeant or general or whatever. And he was on a second career. Everybody else in law school had had life experiences. I hadn't even signed a lease. I hadn't had a traffic infraction. I felt very green and I was very young for law school. Most people take some time off in between. But that was really fun, and it was a different method of teaching. It's the Socratic method where they teach by asking questions. And I realized then that I was a fear-motivated person. I was so afraid, these people had taken a chance on me, and I didn't want to disappoint my family, who was over the moon that somebody was going to law school, because my brothers were struggling in college and weren't finishing, and here I was, moving right along. And so I was very fear motivated. I then transferred to UB Law School, where I ended up finishing up, and that was a completely different vibe. Dickinson was sort of country gentleman, lawyer type of experience, and UB was fast-paced and very urban and urbane, and it was like New York City kids going to law school. It was back to that New Jersey, East Coast, faster mentality. So, but I did okay. Again, I was so afraid. Now I've transferred in. People have taken another chance on me. I don't want to disappoint. And they had an interesting grading system there. So you didn't really know where you were in the class. It was like you got an H for honors or P or an F. And I was pleasantly surprised every day, fearing that I was going to flunk out. And then we got to the week of graduation, they were posting grades, and I found out I was really, really high in the class. And here I thought I was just making it. So sometimes the less you know, the better, because it keeps you more motivated. I think that was it. And then, so that's my whole education in a nutshell.
Let me just follow up on a few things there, and one is to go back to the business with abstraction. If you just want to talk a little bit
Sure.
more about what that is for the people who might be watching this and are not familiar with that, and how it sort of opened the door for you in a law career.
It's when you purchase land, real property law, each piece of property is considered unique in the world, because there are no two pieces exactly alike anywhere, because that location is unique. And what lawyers will do is search back to see if there are any judgments or liens or prior mortgages that need to be discharged. And if the and the second thing they're checking for is the chain of title correct? Are there any people who have an interest, who could claim an interest in the property, whose rights need to be extinguished or they need to sign off? So so when you go to purchase property, especially in Pennsylvania and New York, they do. In Pennsylvania, we were doing searches that went back 100 years to check the line of title, the chain of title, as well as to check for any outstanding judgments or liens or mechanics liens, anything that would affect you getting perfectly clean title at closing. That's what that is.
And it sounds like there was a point at which you might have gone into paleontology because you
Yes.
were there.
Archaeology, paleontology, all that fascinates me. We traveled a lot as a family into the Yucatan. My father's company had an office in Mexico City. He built it up. It was growing. And we were doing business in Mexico. And when I was in high school, I lived for a semester with the family, my father's attorney in Mexico and his family, and the plant manager's family. And we spent a lot of time among the Mayan ruins. So I could have, and that's why I started as a Spanish major, because my Spanish skills they're good, they're not fabulous. I can still get by. But I was totally intrigued by the Mayan civilization, but there were too many snakes in the jungle, and my Spanish wasn't that great, so it was an easy detour into law.
And your transfer from Dickinson to UB, now did Greg do the same thing, or did he stay?
No, he stayed at Dickinson,
So what
but
led
he
you
was
to
3
this-
years ahead of me, so he came back here to practice, and he wanted me to transfer, and I was sort of, oh, no, I'm not going to follow you around, da-da-da-da, and he made an appointment. I was coming up to visit, and he made an appointment for me to have an interview at UB, and he kind of ambushed me with that, and I was annoyed, and I said, no, I'm not going. I'm here to visit. I'm going to stay at Dickinson, and then we were driving from the airport to Jamestown. Okay, turn around, we'll go. So that's why I transferred and had some interesting experiences because of that. I spent the blizzard of '77 at Cease's truck stop with 60 truckers. I have never felt so cute in my life. But that was an experience. I did not understand why anyone stayed in Western New York more than 1 year. Because if that's my first experience in Western New York, it was a doozy.
Well, and of course, this was on Interstate 90, right in the middle of the
Oh, right, it's
snow
yeah.
zone.
And I had been,
Angola,
I had been
Angola.
stranded on the highway for an hour and a half. I firmly believe in angels, and one got me to Cease's truck stop, no question about it.
The other thing is, we should just put this in the context of, okay, you talked about we are Woodland and all of that. This is the 1970s that you're really
Yes.
talking about.
Yes.
And let us move on for the sake of time, Cindy, and talk, having graduated from law school and gotten your degree, the kind of work that you went into and what aspects of the law appeal to you. Where did you find yourself after all of that?
Thank you. After that, I was, mind you, this was the 70s. And back to Dickinson for a minute, there were 30 women in my class. It was huge because there were 30 women. And very honestly, they didn't know what to do with us. They didn't have housing for us. We got there and they were sort of like, yeah, they all came. I think they thought, I don't know, it was the impression that, oh my God, they're here, what are we going to do with them? So they were quickly, we didn't have a place to stay at first, and then they bought the house next door and turned living rooms and kitchens into dorm rooms. So most of my peers weren't getting jobs, or they were, relegated to doing secretarial work or whatever. And at the time, they said, don't learn how to type. If you admit that you can type, boom, you're going to be channeled over into a secretarial pool. Nothing wrong with secretaries. God knows we love them and need them. But you've got a degree, you want to use it. So I was very fortunate in that my first jobs out of law school, well, actually, while I was in law school, I had approached Judge Cass about being I was willing to work for free to be an intern for the clerks, for the court system. And Joe Gerasi, and Cass said, sure, and you can clerk for these other judges too. And Joe Gerasi got me some CETA money, so I made $50 a week or whatever it was at the time, which was lovely. But then I sort of had my toe in the door. They knew me and I knew them, and because I wasn't from here, I had no contacts other than Greg. And the state at that time had funded part-time positions for the lower level judge, the county level judges. And so my first job, I had 2 part-time positions consolidated into 1 full-time. So I was clerking for Lee Town Adams and Judge Willard Cass Jr., Steve's dad. And I think these gentlemen took a chance on me. You're going to hear this theme, because they had daughters that were my age. And sort of these gentlemen were of a generation, their girls were my age, and their children were doing amazing things, and so I think they gave me a shot. And their writing style, so what does a clerk do? We do legal research and drafting, so we're like a ghostwriter. And the 2 judges had diametrically opposed styles. Judge Adams was very terse, concise, succinct. Motion denied, period. Boom. Judgment affirmed, period. Boom. Where Judge Cass felt anyone who picked up a decision should understand what was the problem, what were the issues, what's the law on both sides, and how did he decide. So I spent a lot of time in the law library, and it was a wonderful job for me, not being from the community, because I got to know attorneys from the North County as well as the southern part of the county, the Jamestown Bar Association, the Northern Chautauqua Bar. And even though I was a woman, which I was a different animal, none of them in their right mind were going to intentionally annoy the judge's law clerk. I mean, so I was treated with respect. And there was only there was Mary Schober, who was retired in the Northern County, and Julia Roberson, I think was her name, in Chautauqua County, and Mrs. Spoto, who did not practice. I never met her. But I was anxious to meet this Julia because I was looking for a mentor, and I like to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. And when I met her, she was Vietnam era, different time entirely, and I'm post-Vietnam. So I met her, and she had like Army fatigues on and Army boots, and I just knew stylistically we were going to be miles apart. And she left the county shortly thereafter, and then about a year and a half later, Judith Clare came, and there were some other women who followed. So,
and let's just put an exclamation point on this, because we don't think of that glass ceiling much anymore.
Right, there's so many.
But you're talking about a time in Chautauqua County in the late 1970s in which there were less than a handful of female attorneys.
Nobody that was, only Julia was practicing. And then I come in, and I'm trying to get my footing. And that's why I was so grateful to the judges for giving me a chance. It was a great experience. Then I was approached by Wright in Hampton. I had known the Wrights and Mark, perfect gentlemen, great mentors, very meticulous lawyers. So that was a wonderful experience. So they kind of poached me from the courts. And timing worked out well because I was pregnant and I had a baby, and then I came back and started working for them. And that was another fabulous experience. And while I was at Wright in Hampton, they encouraged me to get involved in the community. I became the first woman president of the Jamestown Bar Association during that time period. And when you go through the chairs at the Jamestown Bar, you serve a year as a program chair, and then you go up to secretary treasurer, then vice president, then president. And I was I take my law degree and my license to practice. I revere it and honor it, and I'm so grateful. And it struck me that there wasn't much enthusiasm for the bar association. Nobody was really doing much. And I thought, we could be doing so much more. So as program chair, I started bringing it, kind of livening it up a little bit. There was apathy, and I felt it was too hallowed an organization to have that much apathy. But I understand it now, especially as I got busier. long story short, one of my achievements was I went to, at Right in Hampton, we would all have lunch together on Tuesdays and discuss things. And I said, I'm thinking of maybe inviting the chief judge of the state of New York. He's never been to this area, I don't think. I'm going to invite him to be a speaker. And they were like, you go right ahead. That's so cute. They sort of had that attitude. And okay. So I was unfettered, and they're like, have at it. And he accepted the invitation and
Who was
came
the
out.
chief judge at the time?
Saul Wackler at the time, who became rather notorious after the fact. But we had a big deal luncheon, and I opened it up to the whole community, and we sent out over 500 invitations. It ended up being at the Crystal Ballroom to accommodate it. And Wackler came in. He was charming, charismatic, and he brought Joe Bellicosa, who was the chief administrative judge. This is like celebrity status judges and celebrity personalities. So it was well attended. It was a big hit. And then Chautauqua approached me, and they said, hey, that was amazing. Do you think he would come and speak at Chautauqua? Well, yes, indeed he did. So that he spoke, and I think to date, Wackler's speech is still the highest selling recorded speech at Chautauqua.
Wow.
He was just really dynamic. He ran into some family issues after that fact and had a medical issue, but it was very exciting at the time.
Let me just fill in a couple of other things here.
Sure.
Just so the audience doesn't have to Google everything if they watch this. Willard Cass was the Chautauqua County Circuit Court Judge.
Yes.
And Leetown Adams was a county court judge at the time.
Correct.
You were clerking for
Yes.
him. Okay.
Yes.
And what, you mentioned you were about to give birth to a child. When did you actually marry Greg Peterson?
That's always a tricky question. We got married in June of '77 between my second and third year of law school. So the first compromise of our marriage was where to live. He had just accepted a job, or he was working with Sherry Cadwell and Bob Sharp here in Jamestown. Cadwell and Sharp was the firm at the time. And we decided to live in Fredonia because I was commuting to Buffalo for my last year of law school, and he was commuting down here.
Okay, thank you
Sure.
for putting that into perspective. And from right at Hampton, I mean, you could have been there.
I would have stayed my whole career there. I loved it there. I thought it was just great. But then, trying to think of the sequence of events. From right in Hampton, my father was ill. And having been raised in a family business, your lunches and dinners are like board of directors meetings. So I was growing up, I was aware of all the customers. I knew who was a problem, what the employees were. You just sort of absorb information. And my dad was ill, and he had these contracts in mainland China. And mind you, this is now '88, so we're 10 years later. And Nixon, was it Nixon? Who opened China?
Nixon.
Yeah, it was Nixon. And my father, to his credit, was very quick to see opportunities there. And I'll tell you about Howard Industries later, but the work that we were doing for pennies per pound, they were doing for pennies per ton in China. So, and at the time, anyone who did business in China had to have, it was mandatory, that the Chinese government be one of your business partners. So my father had these contracts and business relationships in China, all that were new and developing. And he was ill. He needed heart surgery, and he needed help. And I'm flattered when I think back on it, because he came to me and he said, will you please, I hate to interrupt what you're doing here, but I need help. And nobody could get up to speed as fast as you could. And I think the fact that I was a lawyer, everyone thinks lawyers are magicians. We're not. We only know certain things. But I had always been a go-to person. I'm the family fixer. And so he came to me and said, can you take a leave of absence and come help for a while? So that was very exciting because we were traveling back and forth into mainland China very early on, very early on. So what I saw and experienced over there was amazing. For example, I was in Hong Kong when Tiananmen Square happened. And we were waiting for our visas to go from Hong Kong, which again was a British colony still at the time, into mainland. And it didn't come, and it didn't come. And so luckily we had enough business that we were doing from Hong Kong. But Hong Kong is just a phenomenally beautiful and exotic and romantic and spectacular city, and that was just a wild and remarkable experience. My brother was living in Hong Kong at the time. So then we went back, and then getting in, after they got clearance and China opened up again. And so for example, it was like the Wild West. So they would sell seats on airplanes, sell as many as they could sell. So what you learn is that you stand at the gate, and the minute they call your flight, if the plane arrives, if the plane, after they take the cows and chickens out, then they call your flight, and you run like the devil to get onto the plane, because they don't care how many extra. It sold 200 seats for a 50-seat flight. You got to wait till the next one comes, and no one knows when that's going to be. It was that wild. And it got to the point where I just wanted to come home. It was exotic, it was dirty, but I realized then when China gets their act together, God help us. And I often thought that selling cleaners and detergents and everything, China was hungry for that type of product, which wasn't our product. But anyhow, I don't mean to digress into that.
Wow, well, that's a very interesting.
It was phenomenal. It was a great experience.
And your impressions of China today, I'll have to hold off on for a minute here.
Well, I went back I did 3 or 4 trips then, and then I went back when one of our daughters was studying in Shanghai. 6-lane highways, the airport was more posh and modern than anything I've seen. Yeah, they went from agrarian to post-industrial revolution in a very short time, and did it really well. They've got their act together.
You eventually came back home to Jamestown and took on other work here.
Oh, yeah. So I did that briefly while my dad was under the weather, so to speak, with him. And then he had surgery, and then he took back over the reins, and then I came back. And then from there, I went to Bush Industries as general counsel. Again, I was the first woman general counsel, first woman, kind of higher executive, and I've had phenomenal career experiences that I may not have had I been in a larger community. Anyhow, Bush Industries was growing. It was the go-go years.
Furniture maker here in Jamestown.
Yes, for ready-to-assemble furniture. And a great group of people and great experiences. I got one of the early things I got involved in, and again, this is all ancient history, so I'm not revealing any secrets. One of the employees was conducting a lumber fraud on the company, and was, through a series of shell companies, was selling low-grade lumber so the yields were off, and they were, from so much wood, because Paul, to his credit, felt anything that touched the human body should be real wood. You could use veneers here, but they had to be solid on.
This is Paul Bush.
Paul Bush, yes. He was still very much involved at the time. So I worked with the FBI and the state police to do that investigation. I also had another phenomenal career experience where Bush Industries was moving from the American Stock Exchange, because it was a quasi-public company, to the NASDAQ. And so I did all the liaison coordinating to get all that detail work done for the SEC requirements, et cetera, which was a level of, I never held myself out to be an SEC lawyer. And so I worked with people who had great depth of experience. So that was a phenomenal experience. So we were in New York City at the stock exchange. I had breakfast sitting next to, I got the lucky seat sitting between Paul Bush and Richard Grasso, who was the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the day we rang the bell and switched. So that was very exciting. So Bush Industries was really pretty cool. Then after that, I went back to Howard Industries briefly, and then I went to Lakeshore Bank. And there I had another really unique career experience in that I was, again, the first general counsel there, and I was the liaison. They converted from being a savings and loan, which is held by the depositors, to being like a thrift, which is a bank with a stock. So I coordinated with banking lawyers and SEC experts out of Washington, D.C. to get that accomplished. So that was a great experience, too.
Well, we're not done. I mean, there's...
No, I'm not done. And then I've been back at Howard Industries since about I can't remember the dates exactly, but that's where I am now.
In the 21st
Yes.
century.
Yeah, exactly.
And you spent some time at Merrill Lynch for a while.
I did. I enjoyed it. I loved Merrill Lynch. And one of the many great things about legal education is you learn a skill set, and you can apply that skill set in any industry, because it's very fact-based. What are the facts? Not what you think the facts are, what you hope they are, but what are the actual facts? And then, it's just logic but when you get into a business situation, you have to step back a little bit, because the job of the general counsel is to inform or educate the decision makers. This is what the law says. This is what the law is. And then it's up to the business people to decide how they want to apply it or how they want to change the business model to conform.
A couple of different directions I want to take this right now, and I'll just have you speak briefly to each of them. One of them is the amazing career that you have had. And is there one particular role or job that really stands out to you as being most fulfilling or satisfying, or were they all satisfying in different ways, Cindy?
I enjoyed every minute of every day. It was, each experience I had built on the last one. So again, as I said, it's, you have a skill set, and it's just applying it in a different thing, but each one led to the other. So I see a great connective thread through all of it.
Howard Industries, you've mentioned that as the family business a number of times here, and your involvement in it, and you are at this moment the chief executive officer and chairman of the board.
Yes.
So tell us about Howard Industries and what this family business does.
Sure. I want to back up a little bit from Merrill, because there's a thread that ties that. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Merrill, because through all these different experiences, like when I was in private practice, I was doing a variety of corporate work and estate planning. And one of the things I noticed was that when you're in private practice, most people, they have a banker, they have a lawyer, they have a financial planner, and they have a insurance agent. And what I loved about Merrill, or what intrigued me about going there, is I had had all these different experiences. And to me, Merrill was the great intersection, where one place Merrill has a really unique platform. And all of those things could be, so it wasn't, you're isolated in your column. And I thought, what a great place to help people from, when you can help them, their financial situation, not just their legal situation. Their insurance situation, not just their legal situation. And so that was very, very intriguing to me. I probably would have stayed there. And although, I got there, and here I'm in my 50s, and I had to take all of the licensing tests, and that was oh my God, can I do this? Because I had to get insurance licenses, I had to pass the Series 7 and Series 9, or whatever they are. I got all those licenses, so I was set to be there. And then I ended up getting a call back to Howard Industries. And Howard Industries is a family business. My father started it when I was in second grade. And being the oldest child, I think I was more aware of the sacrifices my parents were making to do this startup. My father had been he has a degree in engineering and had been at Koppers Company in Pittsburgh at a time when, if you've seen The Graduate, you know the movie, the famous line is, "Plastics, young man." So at the time, in the late 50s, early 60s, the whole development of plastics was brand new. So I grew up with, even though I only had 2 physical brothers, I had several sisters named Polly. Polyethylene, polystyrene, polypropylene. And so my dad was involved in that sort of ground level by working at Koppers. That was very much, that was the high-tech darling. Now it's computers. A Koppers Company in Pittsburgh. They're still in business, but their focus has changed a little bit. So my dad went into business for himself, and what the company was doing, and Koppers actually came to him and said, "We need somebody, we love you on the inside, but we need you on the outside. We need somebody that we can farm out our smaller orders to." So at the time, what Howard Industries was doing is people would send plastic pellets to us, and we would, again, I'm a kid at the time, I wasn't involved in this. Howard Industries would melt the plastic pellets down and then add other chemicals to it to make it more flame retardant or less flame retardant, more brittle, more elastic, or change the color. It came in clear, we sent it out purple. So one of the things about plastic, especially the molten plastic, hot melted plastic, is that because of its synthetic composition, it does not absorb or does not mix well. The additives would separate out or float to the top. So my dad, to his great credit, became very adept and clever at adding talc or something that would be a binder that would make it blend in better. So we would mix the additives in. So it was no proprietary product. The customers were sending us the additives. They were sending us the pellets, and we'd melt it down, change its composition, extrude it out into a water bath, chop it up into pellet form, and ship it back to them or their customers. So he, again, developed this ability to make it blend better. And then that was going good. He expanded the company into Texas. We moved from New Jersey to Columbus, Ohio. He was in Mexico City. There was a lot of growth, a lot of opportunity. And then China hit. And what we were charging pennies per pound, this is called, it was blending, mixing, grinding, those sort of services. It was called plastic compounding. We were doing plastic compounding for pennies per pound. They were doing it in China for pennies per ton. And even with the shipping costs, they're killing us. And it was the first test, and it was interesting because fast forward, I'm at Bush Industries and I could see China on the horizon. Having had those experiences, I knew how they had devastated my dad's industry. I could see it coming for furniture and everything else.
Well, the story you tell will resonate through many industries here in the Jamestown area and throughout the United States.
And I could see it coming. My father wisely said, okay, no more compounding. We cannot compete. We're getting killed. So he stopped doing the plastic compounding and was just doing chemical processing. So it was just blending, mixing, grinding, drying. So an analogy I will give you is, we don't do food grade, but this example is food grade because most people can understand that. So you are going to make chocolate chip cookies. And the quantities I'm talking about are massive. You get a truckload of flour, a truckload of sugar, 2 truckloads of chocolate, and they all arrive at your factory, and the sugar arrives that came from India or China, and it started out as granules, and it's a solid block, like detergent and sugar will become. And the powder, instead of being free-flowing, it clumps and flumps and comes out in
Sure.
bunches. And you ordered morsels, but they sent you solid blocks of chocolate. So you call me at Howard Industries and explain your problem. And then you send those ingredients to me, and I will dry the sugar or the flour to take the moisture out of it. I'm not changing its chemical composition, I'm just changing its state. I will crush the sugar so that it will now be free-flowing and not a solid block. And then I can't make you the morsels, but I can shred your chocolate, and then you may say to me, great, appreciate you doing that. Send those things, those ingredients on in bulk bags to my customer, or I can send them back to you. Or you might say, as long as you got those three things, mix them together in this ratio and then send it back to me or onto my customers. So it's a service industry is what Howard Industries is.
And you would do this not just for plastics, but for anything that came to you?
Yes, yeah.
And
now mostly, we're not doing plastics at all anymore. We're doing additives or chemicals or detergents or ingredients that repel deer or attract deer. I mean, the whole universe of chemical uses.
and this is something most of us don't ever think about in terms
Right.
of the supply chain
Yeah.
and how things are.
This is way up in, hidden in this supply chain. You never will know that we touched it.
And has the transition from what you did at the beginning to today been successful?
Oh, yes, because it's interesting, now I'm going to flip the other side of the coin. The good thing about so many ingredients being imported from China and India, for example, is that as they come over the ocean, they become, it's hygroscopic, they absorb water and become chunked or absorb moisture that need to be dried. So in some ways, that's okay, because that's the service we provide, is to dry it. Or sometimes the chemical composition will change and the granule size will be too big. And so we will take it from pellet size and take it down to microscopic sizes by grinding it.
So the home office is not in Jamestown?
No, never has been. It's the home office since, the early 80s has been in Columbus, Ohio.
And is that where all the work is done, or are you all over the?
No, my father sold off the Mexican operations decades ago, and then we're out of Texas too. Columbus is the only facility.
So, Cindy Peterson, for those people who've listened to all what you've had to say so far, from going to Allegheny College in Meadville and selecting law and being interested in archaeology and paleontology and all the other things that have occurred in your career, did it ever, anywhere along the line, did you ever think that you'd end up doing this kind of work at the end?
Never. I have two younger brothers who were anxious to take over, but my father died in '97, and I'm 3 years older than him. My next brother took over, and then he died of thyroid cancer when he was 49. And then my other brother took over, and then this is a story for a whole other interview. But to abbreviate it, then my other brother, it wasn't his cup of tea. He didn't have the interest or ability, and I started getting calls from the employees saying, "You've got to come down here." And I kept saying, "No, talk to my brother. Did you bring this issue to him?" And my dad had cleverly, at one point, divested himself of the stock. So he had given it to my two brothers, my mother and myself. And my mother was subject to a buyout agreement. So it ended up just being my brothers and I. And then one brother died, so he got bought out, and then it was just the two of us. and my mother's was gone, and so just my youngest brother and I, and he ran into problems. So I came in at the request of the employees.
So you are here in the Jamestown area. The business is in Columbus. Does that work out all right for you?
Well, for years, I would leave on Sunday or Monday and come back Friday or Saturday, only to leave the next Sunday or Monday. I was commuting a lot. And then that was about the 2015, 2016, 18 era, because the company was in big trouble, and I was on the road, and my biggest fear was developing sales. I thought we were going to close the doors. It was just really in shambles.
This was kind of before you found the new niche, or you just marketing that?
No, it was just when I took it over, it was in that niche of just being a processor. But I didn't know how to grow. I had never been in that. Yes, I was trying to get business, and when I was at Right in Hampton, for example, it was a compliment, even though it sounded backhanded. They would say, wow, I think they wanted me to help them do their work, and I was getting enough clients and customers. They were like, wow, for a girl, we can't believe how much business you bring in, how many clients you have. So I didn't have that confidence level in myself that I could go into the chemical world. I don't speak that language. I'm not a chemical engineer. But one of the things I found out was that the people in that industry they're the girl and boy next door. They are real, they are humble, they are easy to talk to. You ask for help and what do you need to know? I still don't speak that language, but I started going to trade shows and started to get our name out there, and we started to revive the business and get more sales, because we're so niche-y. It's such a niche. If you're not out there telling somebody you can do that, a lot of big companies do this work in-house, and we do work for some of the big names as well as names you've never heard of. But I was very flattered that after about 5 years, I was asked to be on the Board of Governors of SOCMA, S-O-C-M-A, which is the Society of Chemical Manufacturers and Associates. It's a national organization. It's based in Washington, D.C., and it's a trade organization, and I made tremendous friends and great connections through that, and it has been a really fun experience.
Cindy Peterson, we've talked a lot in this interview
Yes,
so far about all the things that you have done, but there's a whole other aspect of your life that we haven't touched on. You and Greg have children. You have a family.
Yes, we do.
And I want you to spend some time telling us about the children and how many you have and how this all came together with you doing all of these things, and your husband, well known in the community for his work as an attorney, Phillips Lytle, and the building of the Jackson Center, and how you managed to get all of that done.
I don't sleep much. Greg always complains I don't sleep enough. We have 3 wonderful children. Our daughter Amy was born in 1980. Our daughter Megan was born in 82, and Brent was born in 1985. Both of our girls have law degrees, and when they even inkled about maybe going to law school, I said, don't go to law school unless you get an MBA as well. So they both went to programs where they got JD and MBA. Amy has used her degrees. She started a business making jewelry out of graffiti in Detroit, she's a great story in and of herself. Our daughter Megan and Amy married a fabulous, interesting man from Brazil, who's now an American citizen, and they have turned a church into a restaurant in Detroit. They're doing great things, and he does private equity as well. Antonio Luck is his name. Our daughter Megan is also in Detroit now. She's had some tragedy in her life in that her husband died a couple of years ago and left her with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So she's right now being a full-time mom, because the theory is if she's working, then her kids have lost 2 parents, because there's no law is really all-consuming. It's not part-time, so is business.
So all the children are in Detroit?
2 girls are in Detroit, and our son Brent is in Washington, D.C., and he's working for the Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. doing a lot of the energy and reclamation projects. He's very much interested in the Anacostia River and all of the improvements that they're making within the city of Washington, D.C. to help restore that river. And his wife, Leah, is from the Philadelphia area, and she's got a fascinating job working for the Pew Charitable Trust in D.C.
Take me back to the formative years for your children, though.
Sure.
With all the work that you were doing as a professional and your husband were doing, how did you manage to do all of those things and raise children too?
You raised a point that's so important to me because early on, Greg's parents chastised us one time and said, no, you two are out there chasing the wrong things. And I had read a book right about that time by, I think, I'm quoting Lucille Ball, but the point was, if your children don't turn out okay, then nothing else you've achieved has any merit. And I took that to heart. So there were several times during my career, I've always worked during our marriage, but there were several times when I went to a part-time basis just because things needed to be shored up at home. Somebody wasn't reading to grade level or somebody needed help with this. And we were very lucky in that this is a great community, and when my daughter was skating, there were mothers who were willing to carpool with us. Greg's mom and dad were tremendous sources of support and help to shuffle people around. And we've got great kids. Anybody who hires one of my kids gets a great worker. So no, we're very proud of them. And Brent graduated from Kenyon. And he's had a dual career too. He's a musician as well as working for the city of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Yeah.
The good fortune that you have had to be able to put all of that together, and you and your husband to maintain extraordinary professional careers. We've learned a lot about yours today. Your husband's work in the community is pretty well known also. So congratulations to you on being able to do all of that.
Well, I think it's being in a small town. I didn't waste 2 hours a day in traffic. I know that sounds crazy, but when you leave this area and come back, you realize there are small blessings that multiply. When we visit in DC, you look at Home Depot is 3 miles. You think, great, I live 2 miles from Home Depot. I'm there in 5 or 10 minutes. It's a 2.5-hour trip in DC to do that. So I think that was where we got extra hours from, because we always lived close to the school, close to the stores. And there have been tremendous people in the community who are friends and raise their kids with us, and it takes a village. That's so true.
We talked about a lot of aspects of your life and career here, and mentioned a number of times in the course of this interview your husband as an attorney and one of the founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center. And I want to get your perspective on all of that. And you told me as we sat down here today that you were deeply involved in it too. So tell us now, I think 24, close to 25 years into the history of this Robert H. Jackson Center, what all that emerging idea was like for you and how you participated in its growth.
Sure. I'm very proud of Greg. I'm very proud of what he has built at the Jackson Center, but he hasn't done it alone. Let me disabuse you of that notion. There have been so many people that have helped along the way. And early on, I should back up, when I was on the Board of Trustees at Chautauqua, Tom and Jane Becker orchestrated a phenomenal experience for me. We had been chatting one evening, and Tom and Greg were talking about sports heroes, and I listened to this politely, and I said, no, the person who I think is the only person that should be on a pedestal is Sandra Day O'Connor. Now, there's somebody who's accomplished something. Fast forward, I'll abbreviate the story, but there was a luncheon, and I was invited. She had spoken, and I was invited, and I was running late from the office, and I get there, and it's assigned seating, and I can't find my seat.
This is in Chautauqua?
No, this was at Chautauqua at the Athenaeum. So I'm walking around nervous, feeling very visible, and not wanting to feel either of those things. And there was one empty seat. It was next to Sandra Day O'Connor, and it had my name on it. So finally they saw me and they're giggling because I didn't dare take that seat. I had no idea. So I walk over and sure enough, my name tag is there. I have never had a more insipid conversation. All I could think, I was so intimidated and so in awe of her. I kept saying stupid things like, so what do you think of Chautauqua or whatever. She was very gracious.
Well, and Chautauqua was very important to Senator
Yes,
O'Connor.
and I got to drive her around a couple of times, and our children babysat for her grandkids a couple of times. And Sandra Day O'Connor, as Dan Bratton, as Carl Kappa, Betty LeNay, all said to us as young lawyers, you've got a gem here in Robert Jackson. And when I was clerking for Judge Adams, we were in the Hotel Jamestown building, and this was back way before there was any glimmer of a Jackson Center. And I was doing research, and I opened this book, and it was dedicated to Jackson from Jamestown, New York. And Judge Cass walked in, and I said, is this true? Robert Jackson was from Jamestown, New York? And he said, yes. And I said, why doesn't anybody know about this? And we all know about Lucille Ball, but dear goodness, this is like royalty. And he said, yeah. So when Greg started talking about this, Mike Foley, there were a lot of people, the idea was germinating around. So when Greg wanted to run with it, I was 100% in favor, shoulder to shoulder. And for the first couple of years, he may have been the face, but I was the stamp licker, letter writer, mailer, hors d'oeuvre preparer, server. I hosted all the early speakers, all were guests at our home overnight. And then it got to a point where, and I don't mean this negatively, but I turned to him and I said, this is too much, the Greg and Cindy Peterson show. This isn't good. It's not good for us. People are going to cross the street when they see us coming. We're becoming a one-trick pony. And for this thing to thrive and grow, it's got to have more support than just me and you. So right about that time, and it was growing, and Dan Bratton was sick at that time. I don't know, there's more of this history that is too long to get into. But then we started to get some, it had no, and Carol Drake, and then there were no secretarial supports,
Sure.
So that was me. There was no catering, that was me. So I was very much involved. I said, I'll stay involved behind the scenes, but to get more growth and sustainability, it's got to have more community buy-in. And sure enough, when you back off, somebody will rise to the occasion and fill that spot. And we've had tremendous volunteers and an army of docents, saints like Ed Tomasini, who have been so supportive. You have been supportive. The Post-Journal has been supportive. Something like this doesn't rise by one person's efforts alone. It has been a tremendous community who also gets how important Jackson is and the statement he's making.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to just take off in that direction for a moment. With all of your experience, your observation as a lawyer and your career as an attorney and many other things, what should we know or think about or look into ourselves in terms of Jackson's writing and work and what he stood for? What's important in your mind about Robert H. Jackson that we ought to know?
Jackson was such a progressive thinker. The positions he was taking back then in the 30s, 40s, 50s have become sort of mainstream today. And I think that's very interesting. The other thing I would take away about Jackson is, yes, he accomplished great things in his career, but what was most intriguing to me about Jackson is that he came from humble beginnings. And there was a teacher who took an interest in him, this Mary Willard. I'm sure you've heard this story before. And he, like Robert Sedig to me, who said, of course you should go to law school. Why wouldn't you go to law school? This woman had that same level of confidence in Jackson. And she ignited something remarkable and beautiful, which was his mind. So I think it doesn't matter what your humble beginnings are, you can achieve great thinking, great oratory, great thoughts, and accomplish much. I mean, he prosecuted the Nazis, wow.
I want to have you speak to some people who may be listening to this and watching it, and that's the women in the audience. You have mentioned throughout the time that we've talked here, Cindy Peterson, about the glass ceilings that you have broken through in terms of being the first law clerk and the first female president of the Bar Association and the first woman to be a partner at Right, and Hampton and Bush Industries and Lakeshore Savings and all of these things, which you did things that no one or no woman had done before. So I think a lot of those challenges are still out there for a lot of women, and I would like to have you talk to them about what you see as a path forward. What would you say to them in terms of trying to achieve in their lives what you have achieved in yours?
Well, I think the first thing is go for it. If I can, I've often said to other young women who have approached me for advice, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too. It's not as daunting as you might think. So that's number one. Number two, and I don't know how relevant this is maybe today, because there's more, I think law schools, the ratios have flipped. There are more women graduating than men now, and women are all over the place in the workforce at so many different levels. But I found the most important thing to me very early on was to develop a sense of humor, because I was often the only woman in the room. And there were, some times when survival meant having a sense of humor. Comments would be made or, that kind of thing. And I found that combating an inappropriate remark with humor was very helpful. There's this whole new movement now where I think culturally we're beyond that. And there's a new code of behaviors that did not exist in the late 70s and early 80s. So I've seen a transformation in that. So to any young woman who was aspiring to be a lawyer, I would say go for it. It's a phenomenal skill set. Greg he's been, all these years at one law firm. He's had many different career experiences, but all in one place. I've had the luxury and the opportunity to have a variety of experiences, and I think having that law background has opened those doors.
I want you to speak for a moment about Chautauqua Institution. You mentioned that you were on the board of trustees there for a time, and as we sat down here today, I pointed out to you that almost everyone knows, I hope many people know, a lot of people know about Chautauqua Institution, but not many people know about the board of trustees that's actually responsible for operating the place. So give us some insight of what it's like to be around that table.
That was a very, very interesting experience. I had done some legal work for the then president, Dan Bratton, and his wife, Juanita, so I think that's how I sort of got on the radar screen. We were not property owners up there at the time, and most of the trustees were property owners. But the structure of Chautauqua is set up. There's a board of trustees, which manages sort of the operations, oversees that of the institution. But then because Chautauqua went through a very, very painful and extended bankruptcy, they have a foundation that handles a lot of the financial aspects of it.
And this is Depression era.
Forgive me, I have now forgotten the exact era, but
in the 20th century.
And I think it was more recent than that. More 40s and 50s, I think, because we had lingering vestiges of that. May have been even more recent in the 60s. But anyhow, I went on and I was the youngest trustee at the time and not a property owner. And while I was on the board, Greg and I were able to get a little condo at Chautauqua. So it was interesting too, viewing Chautauqua as an outsider, not being a property owner, then becoming a property owner and understanding it. It is so deep and so, there's so much offered up there. It really is a jewel and a great asset to the whole Chautauqua region. And it was a great experience. I was on for 10 years. I fulfilled an unexpired 2-year term of Paul Sandberg. Do you remember that gentleman? And so I served with Betty Lene and some really remarkable minds. And I love being exposed to and surrounded by people who are much brighter than me. And Joe Johnson, and I learned to read financial statements through that experience. It was fantastic. I enjoyed it.
Did you ever learn to type, by the way?
I do, but I don't tell anybody.
Well, I guess maybe
Yeah.
we have now.
Yeah.
Cindy Peterson, it's been a wonderful opportunity to come and talk to you about all of these things. Have we left anything out in terms of your life and your work before we move on to a look at the future?
No, I think we've covered just about everything. Thank you. We have.
Where do you go from here, then, in terms of all that you have done and where you and Greg are in your lives now and with children and grandchildren and your family business? What do you think about? What do you look forward to?
Well, I used to do a lot of public speaking when I was in private practice and helping people on, just sort of with organizing their affairs and what you can save or throw out, et cetera. But I think now at this stage of our lives, I'm looking forward to the next chapter. I had 2 grandmothers who were very influential in my life. One that we played cards a lot. And what I realize now as an adult is that the good thing about playing cards with a child is that you teach them to think strategically. If I throw this card, then I need that one, or whatever. So I have very fond memories of my grandmothers. My other grandmother would improvise in cooking. She was a great gardener, doted on me a little bit. And so I'd like to pass that on to my grandkids and spend a lot of time with them. And I hope that I can make an impact in their lives.
It's interesting that this kind of comes around full circle then to the time you talked about moving from Pennsylvania to New Jersey and the very intimate family that you had there because you were new to the community and how all that glued together for you. And now you're kind of coming back to restoring or making that new for another generation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that.
You want to, as we bring this to a conclusion, go back to elementary school for a moment and tell a story.
Well,
I wanted to make sure we had time for you to do this.
Thank you very much. When I found, this is a letter, it was a reading assignment that my 4th grade teacher gave us back March 5th of 1964. So it's been 60 years ago that I wrote this. And the assignment was the nicest thing that could happen to me. And so we wrote these things and handed them in. And unbeknownst to me, my 4th grade teacher called my parents and said, "You need to come in here." And my mother thought, "Oh my God, what could she have done that was naughty?" So the teacher handed her this and said, "You need to hold on to this because this is a child who clearly has a sense of responsibility and duty, and you should hold on to this." Well, my mother died 3 years ago. And in her papers, I found this, and it's kind of amusing. If you don't mind, I'll read it.
Please do.
But it sort of summed me up. It's a reading by Cindy Howard, March 5th, 1964, grade 4-2, Jefferson School. "The nicest thing that could happen to me is if I can join the Peace Corps for 1 year and then turn into somebody famous on Broadway." I would have loved to have done Saturday Night Live. "I would get married, and by that time, I would be old enough, wise enough, and rich enough to support my parents the rest of their lives. I would like to have 3 or 4 children and let them each have a pet of their own choosing. Meanwhile, still be an actress and take care of my mother and father. I would like to live long enough to see that I took care of everything I mentioned and to see that my children are happy." I'm thinking of using this as my obituary because I did not know that I was setting goals then, and I'm very happy that God has allowed me to live long enough to accomplish those things.
Well, it's been wonderful to spend this time with
Thank
you.
you.
And as far as I know, you haven't made it quite to Broadway yet.
I know, but symbolically, yeah, there's a similarity between law and acting, I suppose.
There's
Yes.
a whole other hour there.
Yes,
for us.
there is. Yes,
we
very
don't have
much
the time
so.
now. From the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, with thanks to Ed Tomasini and
Yes,
everyone
thank you, Ed.
here, an hour with Cindy Peterson. We've been blessed to have this time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.